These are alcohol markers. They come in hundreds of colors with pointy tips, brush tips, and chisel tips. Some are really expensive, like Copic, and some are really cheap, like Crayola, but all of them are fun. I'm gonna do my best to talk about how I use markers, but I wanna make sure you know there's no right or wrong way to use any art medium. So if you like using markers a certain way and it makes you happy, then you, my friend, are doing it right. That's the right way to use markers for you. For this demonstration today, I'm using Ohuhu markers and an Ohuhu sketchbook. Yes, that's a real brand name, and I did not make that up. You may have seen the little plastic sheet that I slipped under the first page. That came with the marker sketchbook, and it keeps the markers from bleeding onto the next page, which I think is a really neat thing since markers will bleed through almost all paper. So if you're using markers for the first time, the first thing I recommend is put something underneath your paper to protect your dining room table or art table or whatever's underneath your art, because it will get markers on it, and that's not a good thing. The second thing I want to say is the quality of the markers you get makes virtually no difference in your art whatsoever. Pretty much all markers are the same. So you may or may not know who I'm sketching right now. Those of you who are a bit older from the 80s will know this is Mr. T. And this is the photo reference that I'm using today. And I want to warn you again, the way that I do markers is not the way to do markers. This is my way of doing markers, okay? So please keep this in mind. First thing I'm doing is laying down some cool color. And I do this mostly for darker skin. If it's more of a lighter Caucasian skin, I'll usually go in with a warmer color. But for darker skin, I usually like to go in with a blue or a purple or a teal. And I just want to show you here the photo reference again. Can you see the lavender? Can you see those purples in the skin or underneath the skin? That's what I'm using as our base color. And we're going to be layering colors just like we did with the colored pencils. Okay, now I'm going to come in with some warm colors. I'm coming in with a very, very bright pink. And this is really just for me to see where I want the warm spots to be. And it's more of a guideline for myself. And just like with the colored pencils, I usually like to go in and do the eyes relatively soon, like really right towards the beginning. And that kind of gives me a good indication of whether I've got the likeness right or not. Also, the eyes are where the whitest whites and the blackest blacks are going to be, because again, I want the viewer's eyes to go right to that, and that's going to be the point of the most contrast. Now, in the case of Mr. T, his mohawk and his beard are iconic, and so they are going to be a little bit more contrasty, because honestly, if you took away everything and just left just the black, you would know it was Mr. T just from those eyebrows, the mohawk, and the beard. It's iconic. So that's why in this particular case, I am using black for those parts as well as the eye. And now I'm going to start building up with some darker reds, and I'm just going to keep layering a little bit darker and a little bit darker and a little bit darker. So I'm just going in with the darkest parts are, where the shadow is. And you may be looking at some of those really squiggly lines and wondering, how am I going to get rid of those? And just to let you know, I was thinking the same thing too as I was doing this. I was thinking, am I going to be able to cover this up? Are you going to still see all of these squiggles? But there's a bit of muscle memory here because I haven't used markers in a while. And there was a bit of muscle memory that just said, just keep going. You'll figure it out. So now I'm starting to bring in some more of the even warmer colors, some more of the yellows and the oranges. And remember, this was all layered on top of like a lavender color. So there's still that coolness underneath, and I'm just building up the warms now. And every once in a while, it starts to feel a little too warm, so I'll bring in some blues and some grays to kind of cool it back down again. When I use markers, it's kind of a combination of both the way I do gouache and the way I do watercolors. In a lot of ways, with gouache, I'll lay down base color, like I did the lavender here, but also with watercolors, I'll work light to dark. So I kind of went in with a light base color, that light lavender, and I'm slowly building my colors up darker and darker and darker like I do with watercolors. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that markers are, for the most part, transparent. Like watercolors, they're not very opaque. They seem opaque, but they're not very opaque, unless you're talking about like the black. So for the next 20 seconds, we're going to be seeing 15 minutes of layering and layering and layering. And I want you to see how much darker the skin gets and how much more color is being thrown at it. You can layer markers, and I don't know if a lot of people really understand that, but you can have 10, 20 layers of color all on top of each other, and it kind of blends together in this wonderful tapestry of color. Now that I've got the skin color to the shade that I want to, I'm going to come in with highlights with the colored pencils. And if you remember in the colored pencil video, I showed you how markers work really well with colored pencils. You can lay down colored pencils, add markers on top of that, and the alcohol from the alcohol markers will blend the colored pencils. You can use that kind of in a reverse way for your markers. So you can see I've brought in the highlights with the colored pencils, and now I'm going to come in with a light pink marker and blend them. Can you see that? That's pretty cool, isn't it? And for any of you who are thinking, well, now it's no longer a marker illustration, who cares? Who cares if you use two different mediums for your art? There's no rules, there's no laws that say you have to only use markers or only use colored pencils. You're allowed to use any medium that makes you happy. So mix your markers with colored pencils or acrylic or gouache or whatever you want to. Don't let people tell you what you can and can't do with your art. There's no right way to make art, and there's no wrong way to make art. Make art in a way that makes you happy. Now, one last thing I want to mention about markers, and this is just a little bit of a warning, and that is that markers don't have very good light fastness, which means that when exposed to light, whether it be sunlight or just an indoor light, for too long, they do start to fade. So please keep that in mind if you want to get into markers. They're so fun to use, but they are a bit of a temporary medium, okay? And that's everything I know about markers. I hope I helped in some way, and if you have any other questions, please leave me a comment and I'll do my best to answer.